Hey guys, so in today's video we're going to be going over what a tuple is within Python, and it's also pronounced tuple, just kind of however you want to really pronounce it. You'll hear it said both ways. But when it comes to tuples, ultimately they are lists that you cannot update. So let's go ahead and start by creating a tuple. So my tuple, we'll go ahead and set a variable, will be equals to, how about we do 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So when you see brackets around an output, or just as you see right here, this is what's known as a tuple. Now, I said earlier that tuples are immutable lists, and this means that once a value is set within the tuple, it cannot be updated. So if you think kind of like a house or like a building, those things don't really move anywhere. They're in one specific location, and they're always going to be there until we tear it down or something of the sort. But the point is that it's not going anywhere. And you could think of a house much like a tuple, or like a mountain range much like a tuple. Those things probably aren't going to go anywhere within our lifetime, maybe. So with that said, when it comes to updating tuples, what I mean by they're not immutable, what I mean by that is we could go ahead and call my tuple, and let's call position 1. So that'll be number 2. And let's try to reestablish it a new value of, like, I don't know, 7. My computer is already kind of giving it away, but ultimately we won't be able to update it because tuples don't support item assignment. And if we were to go ahead and run this code, actually I should print it out. Go ahead and print out my tuple. So if I was to go ahead and print this, we would go ahead and we'd get an error. So as we see, the tuple object does not support item assignment. Ultimately, what it's saying is we can't update the items within the list or within the tuple itself because it's not a list. If, for example, we changed it back to a list, we were to go ahead and run this, we'd see that position 1, which is 2, is updated to 7. So as you see, this is a list with the brackets, but then let's go ahead and add, let's go ahead and change it back. And if we were to go ahead and run it again, the tuple just doesn't support item assignment. So ultimately, tuples are ultimately lists that cannot be updated. They're immutable, but they are faster to process. So if you're working on something for speed and you need to be able to recognize the speed of whatever something might be, the tuple would be faster than a list. So just keep that in mind when working with whatever you happen to be working on. Now, one thing that you can do, though, is when it comes to tuples, if you remember what we went over last time where we had the in keyword, we could always check to see if 2 is in my tuple. And if we were to go ahead and print that, we'd get true because 2 is actually in my tuple. Now, if we change it to a string value, we'd get a false because obviously the string value of 2 is not actually in my tuple. It's the integer 2 that is in my tuple, and that's why the other one was true and this is false. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next portion. So when it comes to tuples, you can go ahead and slice them by doing my tuple. We call the brackets, and we'd be able to print this out. And if we were to go ahead and run this, what would happen is we'd have the entire tuple printed out. Now, similar to lists, you can go ahead and use the start value of, say, 0, and we want to go up to, let's say, 5. We'd be able to bring in up to 5. So again, what we're doing is we're starting at 0. We go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we don't actually count 5. We go up to 4. So up to, but not including, position 5. So you can slice a tuple just like you would a list. So just kind of keep that in mind. And just like slicing a list, you can actually go ahead and increment in steps of, say, 2. And what I mean by that is it would go ahead and count in steps of 2. So you'd start at position 0, which is 1. You'd skip this, and then you go to position 2, which is 3. And then you'd skip this, and then you go to position 5. So ultimately, you'd be able to count in steps of 2. But another thing to go ahead and keep in mind when working with tuples is rather than having, much like lists at least I should say, you can always go ahead and count or assign values to multiple variables by doing like A, B, C. So each of these is a different variable, and we go ahead and add a star. And whatever, let's go ahead and do actually the star, and then we'll leave my tuple as the other variable that we will use. So if we were to go ahead and print each one of these, print A, B, C, and then we'll go ahead and print my tuple. B. And if we were to run that, what would happen is we would get 1, 2, and 3 printed out for A, B, and C. And again, we're getting 1, 2, and 3 because A would be the first position. Think of it like the first item that we're selecting, so position 0, which is 1. B would be the second variable, so it'd be taking on position 1. So again, we're starting at 0, counting up 1, and that's where we're getting 2. And then C would take on the third one. And then for the remainder, the reason we get the remainder as a list printed out is because we're using the star. Now, when you assign the star to it, it'll go ahead and return the remainder as a list. So now that we've run the programs, we're getting A, which is equal to 1, B, which is equal to 2, and C, which is equal to 3, and then we're having my tuple return a list. One way of remembering that is the first variable will go ahead and have the first value, the second variable, the second value, the third variable, the third value, and that's where we're getting 1, 2, 3. But the reason we're getting a list is because we're using star, and we're having my tuple, which is also a variable, and it's just going to take the remainder, whatever's left over within the program itself. If we wanted to, hypothetically, we could even add D, and let's get rid of that. And then if we were to go ahead and print out D, we'd go ahead and have 4 assigned to D because it's the fourth variable. And then my tuple would go ahead and take the rest, and I'll go ahead and assign it as a list. So that's just something to go ahead and keep in mind when working with tuples. And that'll actually bring us to the last portion that we'll go over, which is the .count method and the .index method, and then finally the length function. So each of these items can be used with a tuple. And if we were to go ahead and access them properly, we could always do, for example, let's get rid of this. If we were to go ahead and do print my tuple, and then we did a .count, and let's go ahead and count how many times 2 shows up, and let's add another 2, and let's add another 2 right here. And if we were to go ahead and run this, we'd get 3. Now, count, we'll just count the number of times the value that we're seeking is shown within the tuple. So it's the same thing as like a list. And likewise, if we were to go ahead and move on to index, and if we were to go ahead and call 2, we'd see that 2 originates in position 1. So the reason that it starts at position 1 is it goes 0, 1, and that'll return where it first originates, even though we're able to see that 2 is also shown at position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So it'll ultimately just return whatever the index is of the tuple that we're working with. And then finally, that'll go ahead and bring us to the length function. And what length will do is, we'll go ahead and print this out. will go ahead and return the length or the number of values that are held within the tuple. So we're returning 8 values. So if we were to obviously count that, we'd start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So the length function will just go ahead and return ultimately the length of the number of values that are within the tuple. So now that you guys have learned a little bit more about tuples, I'll go ahead and provide additional exercises and the link in the description. You'll just be able to see what we've created here today, and then I'll just have some additional questions for you to go over, for you to go ahead and kind of recap what a tuple is and how you can work with it. But I want to thank you guys for checking out this video. Please feel free to check out some other videos where I go over the basics of Python programming, and hopefully in time I'll be able to create some algorithms and you guys will be able to practice with them. So thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.